Welcome to episode 7 of the HRD Podcast. So imagine you have an employee who has all the required skills, right? They know your agency software inside and out. They have years of experience, but they simply refuse to do the work the way it needs to be done.
Yeah, that is incredibly frustrating.
Right. Your immediate instinct, or like the instinct of the supervisor you're advising, is probably to just bring the hammer down. But in the highly regulated world of federal HR, using that hammer too early or, on the wrong legal classification of employee can backfire spectacularly.
Oh, it absolutely can. I mean, a misstep in how a supervisor applies discipline, it doesn't just fail to correct the behavior. It can lead to grievances, overturned actions, and just a massive loss of credibility for the management team.
Which is exactly why today we're doing a deep dive into the foundational mechanics of disciplinary actions. We are treating you, the listener, as an active participant in this analysis.
Because as an HR professional, your goal is to guide supervisors through these procedures effectively.
Exactly. So we're going to look at how to navigate the nuances of Title V versus hybrid Title 38, how to correctly diagnose a workplace issue, and how to use these structured tools not as punitive gotcha traps, but really as last resort mechanisms to correct behavior.
And that framework is so critical. To advise effectively, you need to understand the underlying mechanisms of these rules, not just like reading the regulations off a page. You really have to know who you're dealing with before you can decide what to do.
So let's start right there with the legal classification of the employee, because, well, standardizing an HR response across the entire federal government is basically impossible.
Yeah, totally possible.
The rule book fundamentally shifts based on an employee's statutory rights. The sources highlight two primary groups for these non-adverse disciplinary actions, right?
Right.
Standard Title V employees and hybrid Title 38 employees.
Correct. The foundational civil service standard is Title V. So when the sources cite 5 U.S.C. Section 7511, what that actually means in plain English is that the individual meets the statutory definition of an employee who has a recognized property interest in their job.
A property interest.
Right. And because they have that property interest, they're legally entitled to specific due process rights before the agency can just, take that job or pay away.
Okay, that makes sense. It establishes like a baseline of federal rights. But then we have this second group, the hybrid Title 38 employees.
Yeah, they're a bit different.
The text notes their positions fall under a combined legal authority. So they are covered by that same Title V code, but also by 38 U.S.C. Section 7401, subsection 3.
That's a lot of numbers, I know.
It is.
Look.
So I want to make sure we visualize the mechanics of this correctly for the listener. Think of standard Title V as driving an automatic car.
Okay, an automatic.
Yeah, the rules of the road are uniform, and the car does a lot of the standard shifting for you based on, established HR procedures.
I see where you're going with this.
Right, so if Title V is the automatic, then hybrid Title 38 is driving the exact same model of car on the exact same road, but with a manual transmission.
Ah, that's good.
The ultimate destination managing the employee is the same, but the mechanical steps the driver, or in this case, the HR professional, must take to shift gears are much more specialized. You have to know how to use the clutch, and the clutch represents those extra Title 38 provisions.
That is a highly accurate analogy, because the clutch, in your scenario, it represents specific specialized procedures. Hybrid Title 38 employees are often in clinical or healthcare roles.
Like nurses and doctors.
Exactly. And that extra layer of legal code exists because evaluating the conduct or performance of a medical professional sometimes requires specialized review mechanisms like specific professional standards boards, things that just don't apply to a standard administrative worker. If you, as the HR advisor, don't verify whether they are Title V or hybrid Title 38 right out of the gate, you might advise a supervisor to push the gas without pressing the clutch.
And you stall out.
You stall the entire disciplinary process.
Which is exactly what we want to avoid. And speaking of avoiding things, there is a massive caveat in the sources regarding who this specific playbook applies to.
Yes, there is. These disciplinary procedures generally do not apply to probationary or trial period employees.
Because they haven't fully earned that property interest in their job yet.
Exactly. The legal landscape for probationary employee is completely different. The agency has much broader discretion to separate them without going through all the progressive disciplinary steps we're about to discuss.
Okay, so identifying the employee's legal classification prevents a procedural disaster. But even if you have the right legal framework, it's totally useless if you misdiagnose the underlying human behavior.
Oh, 100%.
This is where supervisors often get tripped up, and where HR really has to step in to diagnose the root cause, which is performance versus conduct.
This distinction is the bedrock of federal employee relations. The sources draw a very sharp functional line between the two.
Okay.
So a performance problem is fundamentally a can't-do situation, but a conduct problem is a won't-do situation.
Let's expand on the mechanics of that, because applying a conduct solution to a performance problem is basically a recipe for an overturned action, right?
Completely. Let's say your agency rolls out this massive, highly complex new software system, and you have an employee who has been there for 10 years, always a stellar worker.
A great track record.
Right. They attend the training, they take notes, they ask questions, but they simply cannot grasp the new system. Their output drops off a cliff. No matter how hard they try, they literally can't do the job under the new parameters.
So taking disciplinary action there makes no sense at all.
Well, yeah.
You can't punish someone into understanding a software system. They need more training or, I don't know, maybe reassignment.
Exactly. You address the can't do with support. But let's flip the scenario. The same new software rolls out. The employee takes the training, passes the proficiency test with flying colors, but they decide, you know what, they just prefer the old legacy system.
Oh boy.
Yeah. They actively refuse to log into the new software, despite direct orders from their supervisor. They have the capacity, they have the skill, but they won't do it.
Well, that is insubordination.
Yes.
That is conduct. And that is specifically where disciplinary action comes into play. Discipline is strictly engineered to address the won't do.
Yes, it is. And understanding the why behind discipline changes how a supervisor should approach it. I mean, we aren't doing this to exact vengeance.
Right.
The sources outline 4 functional purposes: to deter the employee from repeating the offense, to deter others in the workplace from trying the same thing, and to correct inappropriate conduct early.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on that last point, because reading through these guidelines, I see a really distinct contradiction here.
Oh, so?
The text explicitly states we use discipline to correct inappropriate conduct early. But literally the next bullet point mandates that discipline is a last resort, to be used only when positive non-disciplinary efforts have failed.
Yeah.
So for an HR professional advising a really frustrated supervisor, how do you reconcile that? Like, how can a tool mathematically be both an early correction and a last resort at the same time?
That's a really perceptive catch. And it is the exact friction point where supervisors usually demand to just issue a reprimand on day one.
Right, they want to drop the hammer immediately.
Exactly. It sounds contradictory until you map it onto a timeline of escalating behavior. When the sources call it a last resort, they mean it's the last resort of the informal management process.
Meaning the day-to-day supervisor toolkit, like regular management.
Right. So if an employee shows up late for the first time, a positive effort is just clarifying expectations. Like, hey, you need to be here at 8 a.m. Is there a misunderstanding?
You just talk to them.
Yeah. You don't jump to an official reprimand because you haven't exhausted those informal positive efforts yet. Discipline is the last resort when that informal coaching completely fails.
Okay, I follow the last resort part, but then where does the early correction factor in?
It factors into the formal procedural timeline. Let's say the positive efforts failed, right? And the employee's chronically late. They're actively choosing to ignore the start time. A won't-do situation.
Right.
You use a lower-level disciplinary action early in the formal process to prevent a massive derailment later. You issue an admonishment now, early in the cycle, so that the behavior doesn't escalate into severe insubordination or, like, weeks of AWOL that would eventually force the agency to remove them from federal service entirely.
Okay, I see the mechanism now. You use the last resort of the informal process to trigger the early stage of the formal process.
Okay.
It's basically a strategic intervention to save the employee's career from a much worse fate down the road.
Precisely. It's about course correction before the car drives entirely off the cliff.
So let's look at the actual steering wheel and brakes. We have to execute that course correction. We've verified Title V or hybrid Title 38. We've diagnosed a won't-do conduct issue, and the informal positive efforts have failed.
Right.
So we open the official HR toolkit. The sources lay out a strict escalation ladder, and the very first rung is counseling.
It's the first rung, yeah. But we need to put a giant asterisk next to it for the listener, because counseling is not a disciplinary action.
Which feels super counterintuitive to a supervisor who is sitting down to have a really serious talk with an employee. Why isn't it discipline?
Because it lacks the legal weight and permanence of censure. Counseling, whether it's verbal or written, is used for minor, infrequent infractions. is really an administrative tool to prevent a recurrence when formal discipline just isn't legally warranted yet.
To bring back our driving analogy, if the formal disciplinary actions are traffic tickets, then counseling is hitting the rumble strips on the side of the highway.
Oh, I like that.
It's a loud, vibrating warning. It wakes you up. But it doesn't damage the car, and it doesn't cost you a fine.
And crucially, it doesn't go on your permanent driving record. Even if a supervisor issues a written counseling and, the employee receives a physical copy of that memo, that document does not go into the employee's official personnel folder, the OPF.
Wait, it doesn't go in their official file at all?
Nope. The supervisor might keep a copy in like a local desk file just to document that the positive effort occurred, but it's not an official permanent stain on their federal record.
Well, that is a massive distinction for HR to communicate. If a supervisor says, I want to leave a paper trail to punish this guy, HR needs to advise them that a written counseling only leaves a trail in their own desk, not in the federal system.
Exactly.
But if the rumble strips don't work and the employee keeps drifting into the shoulder, we cross the legal line into official disciplinary actions. And the first real tool is an admonishment.
Now we are issuing a traffic ticket. An admonishment is an official letter of censure for minor misconduct. This is formal discipline, and it has a direct psychological and professional impact on the employee.
Because it goes into the OPF.
Exactly. An admonishment normally remains in the employee's official personnel folder for up to 2 years.
Wow, 2 years is a long time for a piece of paper to follow you around. I mean, anyone looking at their file for a promotion or a transfer is going to see that warning shot.
Yeah, it establishes a formal, visible pattern. Now, if the misconduct is more severe from the outset, or if the employee just continues the bad behavior after receiving an admonishment, the agency escalates to the next tool, which is a reprimand.
Mechanically, a reprimand and an admonishment look very similar to me. They're both official letters of censure placed in the OPF. But a reprimand clearly carries significantly more weight.
It does. It acts as an anchor on their career progression for an even longer period. A reprimand is for more significant misconduct, and because it's a more severe action, it normally stays in the OPF for up to 3 years.
So an admonishment is the ticket for running a stop sign, visible for 2 years. A reprimand is the ticket for reckless driving. It stays for 3 years and signals to everyone that this was a really serious breach of conduct.
And if letters of censure fail to correct the behavior, or if the initial misconduct is just egregious enough, we reach the final, most severe tool in this specific toolkit, which is the suspension.
This is where we impound the car, taking someone out of the workplace entirely and hitting their wallet.
Yeah. By statutory definition, a suspension places an employee in an involuntary non-duty, non-pay status for disciplinary reasons.
Ouch.
Right. They're legally barred from working, and they do not collect a paycheck.
But the sources draw an incredibly sharp line in the sand regarding suspensions. A suspension is only considered a disciplinary action if it is 14 calendar days or less.
That is the critical threshold, 14 days or less.
If you want to dig into the why of that, like why does a 14-day suspension fall into this lower toolkit, but a 15-day suspension is suddenly reclassified as an adverse action? What actually happens at day 15?
It all comes back to statutory rights and agency risk. When a suspension hits 15 days, or, if you demote or remove an employee entirely, the law views the financial and professional harm as so significant that it triggers an entirely different set of legal protections.
Legal protections like what?
Well, for one, adverse actions generally require longer advance notice periods to the employee. But more importantly, actions of 15 days or more trigger the right to appeal to the Merit Systems Protection Board, the MSPB.
The MSPB.
Yeah, which is an independent federal agency that essentially functions like a court.
Ah, okay, so staying at 14 days or less keeps the dispute internal to your agency. But the moment you hit 15 days, you're essentially inviting an external federal judge to scrutinize the supervisor's actions, the HR procedures, the evidence, everything.
Exactly. It is a massive escalation in legal risk and evidentiary burden for the agency. That 14-day wall is really the boundary of the supervisor's immediate internal disciplinary toolkit.
That makes total sense now. It's about containing risk. So, let's say a supervisor issues one of these internal actions, like a 5-day suspension. Every action creates a reaction. The employee has due process rights. They don't just have to sit there and take the financial hit silently.
No, they don't.
They have a right to grieve the action.
They absolutely do. But the path that Grievance takes is entirely dependent on one very specific detail of the employee's status.
Right, and looking at the matrix and the sources, this is where I would assume the severity of the action dictates the appeal path. I'd assume, an admonishment goes to one desk and a suspension goes to a higher desk.
Right, that would seem logical.
But it doesn't. The entire appeals routing hinges completely on whether the employee is in a bargaining unit or BU. Why does union status completely supersede the severity of the offense when determining the grievance path?
Because a collective bargaining agreement is a legally binding contract between the federal agency and the union. When an employee is in a bargaining unit, meaning they're covered by the union, the agency and the union have negotiated a very specific alternative dispute resolution process.
And the sources label that a negotiated grievance.
Right. The legal contract literally binds the agency to use that negotiated procedure. It supersedes standard internal agency policy. So if a BU employee gets a 5-day suspension, they must use the negotiated grievance process outlined in their union contract.
But if they are non-bargaining unit, meaning they aren't covered by a union contract, they don't have that negotiated alternative.
Exactly. Without a union contract, they just fall back on the standard internal framework, which the sources call the agency grievance process.
Wow, it's remarkably streamlined once you understand the mechanism. Bargaining unit equals negotiated grievance. Non-bargaining unit equals agency grievance. And I noticed the matrix also includes probationary and temporary employees here.
Which brings us back to our earlier caveat.
Right, we established earlier that management generally doesn't use these specific disciplinary procedures for probationary employees because they can just separate them. But the matrix notes that if, for whatever rare reason, an agency does choose to issue an admonishment or reprimand to a probationary employee, they follow this exact same grid.
Yep.
If the probationary employee is BU, they use the negotiated path. If non-BU, they use the agency path.
It basically confirms that union status is the absolute defining metric for the grievance routing, regardless of tenure or, the severity of the non-adverse action.
When you lay the mechanics out like this, it really strips away the anxiety surrounding discipline. It's not just a chaotic series of punishments, it's a highly logical flowchart. First, you verify the jurisdiction. Is it Title V or hybrid Title 38?
Right.
Second, diagnose the root cause. Is it a can't-do performance issue or a won't-do conduct issue? Third, if it's conduct, you try positive efforts. If those fail, you open the toolkit and escalate proportionately, counseling, admonishment, reprimand, or a suspension up to that critical 14-day wall. And finally, route the inevitable appeal based entirely on their bargaining unit status.
It really is a flowchart designed to ensure fairness, documentation, and ultimately the main goal, which is returning the employee to a productive state.
And as an HR professional advising a supervisor, understanding the why behind that flowchart makes you an invaluable strategic partner, not just a rule enforcer.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up today's analysis, I want to leave you, the listener, with a provocative thought that builds on the test we've just explored.
Oh, I like these. The rules are black and white, but the application is always gray. Let's hear it.
The document draws a very clean binary line between won't do conduct and can't do performance. And obviously it is an elegant diagnostic tool. But I want you to consider how blurry that line can get in the messy reality of human behavior.
Oh, for sure.
Could a situation that perfectly mimics a won't do conduct issue actually be masking a hidden systemic can't do problem?
That is a fascinating layer to add.
Think about an employee exhibiting severe burnout, or an employee dealing with a catastrophic lack of department resources, or maybe incredibly toxic, contradictory instructions from middle management.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
Right. On paper, when they fail to execute a directive, it looks exactly like insubordination. It looks like a choice. It won't do. But in reality, the psychological environment or the structural dysfunction has created a scenario where they literally can't do the job safely or effectively anymore.
That's powerful.
The challenge for an exceptional HR advisor is having the emotional intelligence to look past the binary flowchart and see the human context underneath. Because if you discipline a structural failure, you will never fix the workplace.
That right there is the difference between just reading the regulations and actually managing human resources. The guidelines provide the structure, but you have to provide the critical context.
Exactly right. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of the HRD Podcast. We hope this deep dive into the mechanics of non-adverse actions equips you to better advise your leadership teams.
The tools are really only as effective as the professional wielding them.
Keep that in mind the next time a supervisor asks for the hammer. Remember, you can find more episodes just like this one in the HR Info Hub for Human Resources. If you find yourself facing complex union contract questions and need more specific guidance on labor relations, please contact your local subject matter expert.
They're a great resource.
And finally, if you have questions about other training offerings, you can always reach out and contact us at visn8hrd@via.gov. Until next time, keep analyzing, keep advising, and keep looking for the why behind the rules.